Susan Mulkey. Here. Kip Ward is excused. Roger Sprague.
Here.
Wes Ryan.
Here.
Chester Norikis.
Here.
Dick Anderson.
Here.
And Don Williams.
First item on the agenda is the business gap analysis.
Good afternoon. That analysis that you just referred to the goal of it was to look at which business sectors in Lincoln City were weak or missing completely, but most importantly, which of those types of businesses that we might want to recruit would have the best chance of surviving, being successful. It was anticipated that the information that we received could then be used by the different organizations that do economic development in our area and help them direct their efforts that they put into economic development. Northwest specializes in economics, finance, and planning, and they conducted several focus group discussions and performed additional analysis to complete the study. With us this afternoon is Nick Popanek, and his background is in economic development, and he's been with Echo Northwest for nearly 10 years. He oversaw the analysis and a team of about a half a dozen folks who worked on various aspects of the study. Hopefully you'll have a few questions for him this afternoon. And with that, I believe Nick has a few opening comments.
Great, thank you very much for...
do this with the mic.
Right, although with my volume, I think it's better to put it back there. So thank you very much for having me here tonight. It was actually a really enjoyable study for us to work on. At Echo Northwest, we work on communities large and small across the country. Many of them ask us to look at target industry analysis or industry cluster analysis, where we're looking at the relative size of different industries in the local economy. A lot of folks use that information in sort of mystifying ways. For example, it's not uncommon to see jurisdictions identify what their biggest and strongest industries are and then decide that they're going to focus their business recruitment efforts on those industries, where they're essentially spending public resources to attract competition to the businesses that are already succeeding in their communities. Instead, Lincoln City, the city staff, Kurt, came to me and said, we do want to have a more efficient, more focused approach on business recruitment, but we'd like to understand where the gaps in our economy are. What are some things, some businesses that are missing here that might make our economy stronger and better and just help grow the overall regional economy? We actually came after this from two separate approaches. One was to look at traded sector economy. So these are the things that primarily benefit folks from outside of town. You might think of that as manufacturing in a lot of jurisdictions where you're making a product and sending it out to customers elsewhere. But it's also tourism, if you have folks from outside of the region coming in to shop and stay and buy things in town. And that's traded sector, and we look for gaps there. But we also wanted to look at local sector economy. These are the day-to-day shops and needs that residents of your own community would like to buy in town, but sometimes they have to leave town and go someplace else for it. That's a phenomenon known as leakage, and ideally you want to resolve that so you can keep more of those dollars in your local economy supporting jobs here. My understanding is that our report was reviewed by the Urban Renewal Commission in November, and so I won't spend a whole lot of time going over the details of the report. I'm going to try to keep my remarks fairly brief and then preserve most of the time for questions. One of the important things that we did in this study, when we were looking for gaps on the traded sector, you'll have Appendix A or Exhibit A in front of you, and on Table 7 you'll see a long list of different industries, and each of those industries has what we call a location quotient. That location quotient is the relative concentration of that industry in your economy. So we compared the composition of Lincoln City's economy to a host of different local cities up and down the coast. And if an industry on this list has a location quotient that's more than 1, that means it's more heavily concentrated here than in other similar jurisdictions. And if it has a location quotient of less than 1, then you could say that there's a gap here. It's underrepresented. There's a long list of industries that are less than 1, but just looking at that list doesn't tell you whether those are great opportunities for an entrepreneur to come into the community and start a new business, or whether there is a lack of demand or barriers to development that logically prevents that industry from succeeding here and is not a good use of public resources to try to recruit. Sometimes you can see an obvious example of that. There's a low concentration of the mining industry here. Well, if your community doesn't have the right minerals in the ground to mine, that's not a business recruitment opportunity. That's just an obvious and reasonable place for you to have a lower concentration. But not all of them are that obvious. One of the things that we did then was, rather than focusing our attention on just what the statistics and data told us were low concentration, is we instead looked at the industries that had the highest concentrations. And we wanted to see things that were both highly concentrated and very large in terms of contributing wages to the local community. And also the types of industries that might really benefit from some type of economic development intervention. You'll notice at the top of the list, in terms of highly concentrated industries, was utilities, but we don't recommend anything on utilities. It's not the sort of thing that you can really provide economic development incentives for to get more utilities in your community when you're talking about water and wastewater and those kind of things. So what we did come up with were accommodations, retail, trade, and food services. And that's probably not a surprise to anybody here, but those are all industries that are doing very well in the local economy. They are large, they employ a lot of people, they pay a lot of wages, and they are more heavily concentrated than in other communities up and down the coast. So you have a larger share of your economy coming from those industries than your competitor cities. And they are the type of industries that we feel you could have an impact on through economic development policies. So that's why we took an additional step, not just doing this quantitative analysis, but doing qualitative analysis, where we had focus group meetings, industry representatives from each of those three sectors. We targeted small, medium, and large-sized businesses because they all come with a different perspective. And we asked them, what are the types of businesses that are missing in town here that could help your business be more successful? And from that, we got a long list of different businesses, everything from a flower shop to a Trader Joe's to a commercial laundromat, just a couple of dozen of different business ideas that were brought up. But what we wanted to do is not try to evaluate whether a laundromat would be better for the local economy than a florist. In order to do that type of analysis, you'd want to do for each and every one of those businesses a feasibility study, understand whether there's a market for it here, how many people it would employ, what it would do to the overall economy in terms of positives and negatives of bringing in new business, but also competition with existing businesses. That level of detailed analysis is fairly extensive, especially when you're looking at a long list of businesses. So what we came up with was a sort of grouping or categories of the types of businesses that seem to make the most sense for business recruitment efforts to target. And on the first page of our report, we list those there. One, businesses that support the city's existing comparative advantage. So these are examples like a wholesaler or commercial distributor, commercial laundry, hospitality training agency. These are sort of support businesses that all of your existing strengths in the economy could benefit from. Second type of business would be an indoor family attraction. Examples that came up in the focus groups included a water park, a trampoline park, indoor playground, those types of things. Folks thought in your strong industries within this economy that having something like that here, that kind of a local attraction, would help strengthen those already vibrant businesses that you have. And then the third thing that came up were retail and restaurant chains. And examples that were brought up were Trader Joe's, Fred Meyer's, or any sort of family-friendly chain restaurant. All of those seem like appropriate targets in terms of things that could be attracted here to support your strong traded sector businesses. We actually recommend that the first two categories are the ones that maybe are most appropriate to focus on, because bringing in businesses within those first two categories would unlikely have any sort of competition with existing businesses. Whereas when you start talking about retail and restaurant chains, it could be good overall. It could certainly help those strong business sectors that you have in your economy, but there would be competition to consider in terms of how is this going to affect local businesses that are already here. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea, but it's just a lower priority, in our opinion, than those first two categories. And in addition to those traded sector businesses that you could bring in, We did also identify some gaps in the local economy. These are things that it doesn't seem like there's an obvious reason preventing these types of businesses from being here and serving your local population. And those types of businesses we identified were automotive rental and leasing, so car rental, home health care services, doctor's offices, gyms and fitness centers, and retail electronics. So when we look across the state at cities, your economy has less of those types of businesses than you would expect for a city of this size. And so those seem like things that could be attracted here and that there should be demand for based on your population. So those were the results of our study. Big questions then are, what do you do with that information? What's the next step in terms of actually achieving economic development? What role does the city and the Urban Renewal Agency play in that economic development versus its regional partners like the Chamber of Commerce and the County Economic Development Alliance? And I understand that the next item on the agenda is really to talk about those sorts of roles in economic development and who does what. So with that, I'll just turn it over to you all for questions. Any specific questions you had on this business gap study?
Mr. Chair? One question I have is, because we're a seasonal economy, how does, or was that taken into consideration in your study? And if so, what do you think the effect would be on bringing a business here that would thrive during the busy period, and would they be able to make it through into the next busy period?
So seasonality definitely came up. On this business gap analysis, it didn't play a defining role in which sectors we identified as the strengths of the economy and where we identified individual gaps. When we look at the local sector businesses, when we're talking about doctors' offices and gyms that predominantly would serve the local population, the seasonality is less of an important issue. But when we look at the traded sector, and we came up with retail and food service and accommodations, even though our focus groups, we asked them about what type of businesses they'd like to see here, across the board, they all brought up that seasonality was a challenge for them. And when they were looking at the types of businesses that could help them succeed, one of the key things that they brought up was an indoor family-friendly attraction. So something that could help provide their, during the summer months, they're doing fine already. But they would like their businesses to be stronger during the off-season. And having an indoor family-friendly attraction would be the type of business that could help them with that seasonality issue.
I can see that a commercial laundry would be a real asset to the hotel and even the VRD industry. But the seasonality might prevent somebody from coming here and doing that, because they're going to have a payroll through the slow time and not a whole lot of income coming in. So I just wonder if that's really feasible.
So I would say that in the list of businesses that we identified as gaps, we did not try to assert that those businesses are feasible here. So there'd be a next step for any one of those individual businesses, like a commercial laundromat. You'd want to do a feasibility study. The issue is that with so many potential businesses that folks identified during those focus groups, you don't want to do a feasibility study on all of them.
Right.
So my recommendation would be that first pull together the information that you have on your community that you can share with interested businesses that might want to locate here, or entrepreneurs that might want to start up here, so they understand what they're getting into. Then as the opportunities present themselves, if a commercial laundromat comes asking questions, or if you task your economic development staff with going out and talking to potential tenants like a commercial laundromat, then you can have a feasibility study for those individual uses when you have an actual user that's at the table, somebody who is a real opportunity and not just a speculative project, because you do want to make sure you're being efficient in how you're doing these kinds of studies. And at this point in time, it'd be too speculative to do that type of analysis. But you're right, that when there's gaps in the economies, it might represent a good opportunity for a new business to locate here, but it might represent the fact that there's just not enough demand, or that there's issues like seasonality that prevent them from being successful here.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Mr. Anderson?
Nick, Thank you. I think this was helpful. There were a couple of surprises for me, anyway, and it was, but your answer just to this last question helped me of how you came up with, automobile rental leasing and some of these suggested physicians. What I was missing out of this was something off the wall. And so maybe I'm ahead of the game, so be sure to tell me that. But I'm trying to think of, Pendleton, Redmond, and the steps they may have gone through, and somehow Google or, drone research ends up in their communities. I'm not sure it was on a list, but maybe it was. Because it feels like, looking at this stuff, we continue down the same track as you've identified our strengths. And what bothers me there is, they're probably lower level service jobs and income, and we're trying to bump our way out of that and up. So doing more, or, a commercial laundry that assists the service industry may sound good, but I don't think the pay is any better than that industry. So how do we bounce out of, or how do we send a message to SWAT teams, researchers, or whoever, to look beyond, what our strengths already are? And I guess what I'm thinking out of the box is, you'd be, we used to be natural resources on the coast, and so you built communities near the forest, sawmills, that kind of stuff, ports. We don't have to do that anymore. So what could we invite using what we have naturally here? And I don't feel that the consultant was in here. Your expertise and knowledge around the country and communities, it's heavily regurgitating what the focus groups kind of jumped on. So it's a mouthful, and I don't mean to lay it on you as a negative. No. But I'm looking for something beyond the obvious.
No, it's a really good question. One of my colleagues, Bob Whalen, who I've been doing this for 10 years, he's been doing this for 30 or maybe close to 40 years now. He was involved in this study with us. Bob likes to use the example of Seattle. And if you had a consultant that went back to 1970 in Seattle and was doing a location quotient study, trying to see what their biggest industries are, it would have showed that the fisheries are really where they need to dedicate their time. Fishing and natural resources. It wouldn't have shown coffee. It wouldn't have shown electronics. It wouldn't have shown retail. And yet, after that point in time, you've got Starbucks, Costco, Microsoft that all took off in that community. So this idea of analyses that look towards your past might not be the best way to capitalize on your future opportunities is absolutely a correct concept. That doesn't mean that this doesn't have value, but it does mean it's missing that piece. When it comes to economic development strategies, one of the things that we at Echo Northwest recommend is to focus on improving the conditions of your community that will be attractive to a range of businesses and opportunities that you might not have ever thought of. And so that's things like having a good education system, having a strong workforce, having good infrastructure, having available land with access to markets. So those types of things can help prepare you to be competitive for all kinds of potential businesses that aren't going to show up on a list like this. And so then when you have an opportunity that shows up, it may be something that was completely unexpected, but if you've got good infrastructure and a good workforce, and you've got sites available to accommodate that type of industry, and if you've got the staff and the council and the public and private leadership that can jump on that opportunity and make sure that they share all the necessary information with that potential business and are ready to roll up their sleeves and find a way to bring that business to town, that's really important. So I think you're absolutely right. I think you definitely don't want to try to guess what that industry is and say, again, we've seen a lot of jurisdictions who 10 years ago had plans. They said, biotech. Biotech's a hot thing. We want to bring biotech to our community. And they start coming up with all these plans to attract biotech to town. Meanwhile, they have other businesses that are trying to locate there, but, well, you're not in biotech. Sorry, you don't qualify for this type of incentive that we offer. You shouldn't be that specific that you're passing up other opportunities, but the best way to be able to capture those newer, stronger, futuristic industries that you don't know what they're going to be is really to focus on the fundamentals of education, workforce, infrastructure, and then just a good community climate to do business in.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Williams?
I need to echo Mr. Anderson's remarks, too. I could have gone out and done this, and I mean, no offense by that, but this is just kind of general. I mean, when we listen to the food service, let's see, below are the desired businesses from the food service group. They want a nightlife establishment that's family-friendly and targeted to seniors. It doesn't work that way. I mean, it's just a, yeah, here's what I want. Okay, thanks. And what I'm looking for, and I think what Mr. Anderson was looking for is, okay, great. We want these things. Help us get to that point. I recognize that we need infrastructure and we need an education, and we all get that. Are there examples of other towns that have been in a situation that we're in where you or another group has come in and said, okay, here's where we think this would work, and it has actually worked? Do we have any examples to draw from?
We do in part, but I would say there's a lot more examples of communities putting the cart before the horse, identifying specific businesses that they put into an official strategy, and they say, this is what we're going to go after, and then not succeeding at it.
Okay, how does this help us get around that?
This is the first step, I think, in more efficient business recruitment efforts, so that when opportunities present themselves, staff now have data and information to understand whether this is something that is missing from the economy or not. If someone's coming in and says, I'd really love to have a loan or a private-public partnership with the city to invest in my business, and you have a database that says, well, this industry is actually already succeeding here, we don't need to be giving out any kind of incentives for it, why would we be investing in your business versus another business that comes in, and you say, actually, that does match with the gaps that we have in our economy. This does seem like something that our strong economies have said that they want and that would be consistent with helping their businesses grow. This is the type of opportunity that we might want to invest more heavily in.
Okay, and I see it. I'm not going to beat this dead horse too much, but I guess what I'm looking for, and maybe it wasn't what you were asked to do, is let's say we want to bring in Google. Okay, Google's it. Do we even have the housing for it? Could we even possibly begin to attract them? Or is that just something that's off the plate? What do we need as an infrastructure to bring that in? And that's kind of what I'm looking for in this is, if you want this, you need this. If you want this, you need this. And I'm just not getting a lot of guidance from this. And again, I'm not attacking. I want a little more meat in this.
Yeah, I would say that the type of document you're describing most closely aligns with an economic opportunities analysis. And those are documents that are done periodically by jurisdictions all across the state. I'm not sure, Kurt, if maybe you know when the last time Lincoln City updated an economic opportunities analysis was?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. So that's the type of document that really does look at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I mean, it identifies, here are the things that your community is doing well, here's the things that they're not doing well, here are the opportunities that the community has, and here's how each of those things, the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, relate to different business industries. So when we look at these types of industries in the future, that might be something you could attract here. Does it look like it's a good fit for your community? If not, does it look like you have an opportunity to make your community a good fit for it? So if you want to attract manufacturing is looking for X, Y, and Z. You have X and Y, and you can get Z if you do this. So that's an economic opportunities analysis, and we do those for communities across the state.
And would that then give me, if I were to say, okay, we want to bring in cash and carry, would that study then tell me, okay, here's the types of jobs that creates? There's 5 middle management, there's 1 supervisor, they need this amount of housing generally. The support staff is going to be 10, and here's their wages, and here's the kind of housing they're going to need. So we can, look at these things honestly, that do we even have these things in place, or should we look elsewhere?
Yes and no. So the typical economic opportunities analysis, when we talk about types of businesses, there's this giant hierarchy where you start at the top level, and the federal at the federal level, there's summary reports that'll break down the types of industries in the country into a dozen or 2 dozen key sectors. And then within each of those, it's nested that, well, really that you can define that into half a dozen individual sectors. And with each individual sector, there's more, branches and branches and branches. When you get down to the cash and carry level, you're at the finest level of detail, where that's one of, 400 individual business types. So an economic opportunities analysis won't typically evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of your economy for each of 400 types of businesses, just because it would be, a massive undertaking. It sticks at a higher level, but it wouldn't be a challenge if you had a specific list of businesses. So you do your typical economic opportunity analysis at the higher level, and then identified, this shorter list of specific businesses and really honed in on them. That's certainly something that you could do. The question is just making sure that you've selected the right list of specific businesses that you're particularly interested in.
Okay, thank you.
We've got about 4 more minutes before we're going to stay on track. Mr. Narikas or Mr. Ryan, do you have questions?
Madam Chairman, if I could then, if nobody else has anything, could I pursue that a bit in these last 4 minutes? Nick, I agree with everything you're saying now, that we're moving to this, and for a long time we've talked as a community, we know we have a housing need and a workforce housing need. Education is improving, but not there yet, and I mean the whole gamut, from even up to technical trade and everything else, skills. Medical services, facilities work on that, and workforce. It's not like we kid ourselves in this community thinking that people are dying for a job. In fact, the employer is dying for a workforce that would show up every day and be dependable. So, chicken or egg? When do I'd like to start working on these things, and we have been now, but when we get impatient, also wanting those jobs, coming, or opportunities coming. Because if we get a developer, why would a developer build houses, if they don't get filled quickly and have things ready and everything else? How do you go about something like this to start so you're moving in what we would call and be able to sell to the citizenry that it's economic development? Because you're talking about basic components before you know who's going to be filling those spots.
Yeah, so there are 2 kind of fundamental economic development documents that a lot of local communities have. One is the economic opportunities analysis, and another is an economic development strategy. And I would highly recommend Lincoln City to work on both of those documents. The first one can really help you identify what are realistic and feasible industries for you to be going after, and what the barriers to achieving those industries are. The second is really a planned document that says these are the specific steps that need to be taken. This is how much they're going to cost. These are the different players that we have in the region that can help undertake those efforts. And if we want to be successful, here's phase 1. Phase 1 is, it's probably going to need to include both the things that bring in businesses, but also strengthen the workforce here and allows you to attract a workforce. I think you're probably going to have to pursue both of those simultaneously rather than one before the other, because I think you're right, one before the other won't necessarily work. And at the same time, there's this push and pull between strategy and opportunity. And I think the strategy is very important, But just having the basic data pulled together, again, a site inventory that tells you where your available sites are for both new development and vacant buildings, who the owners are, so that if somebody does come to town and wants to open up a business, it might not be anything having to do with your strategy, but you can take advantage of that opportunity by having informed staff people jump on that opportunity, meet with them, put them in touch with the right sites, the right real estate brokers, and hopefully get something going that's independent of your strategy. But, the mayor's comments really point towards an economic opportunities analysis, and your comments really point towards an economic development strategy, and the combination of those efforts would point you in the right direction. Unfortunately, without having done those, I can't give you the sort of the silver bullet answer as to what you should go out and do tomorrow to make this a more competitive community, but having those types of documents could really help set you on the right path.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Sprague?
A quick comment. Your report shows that we don't have a car rental agency. We do have a business in town that does rent a car when you need one. Secondly, did your report take into consideration home office campuses by any chance?
I don't know that it looked at home office campuses because the industry sectors that we have listed were derived from Implan, which is a national, actually international model that updates every year that has information on the local economies of every municipality across the country and in many places across the world. The reason why you will see discrepancies is that, for example, if a local business that rents cars fills out their tax returns and enters their NAICS code, their job classification code, as something different than what it really ought to be, then that then funnels into Implan in a different place. And so it's very common when the numbers from Implan are the best that there are out there in terms of modeling a local economy, but they're certainly not perfect, and there's data errors that go into it. And local jurisdictions can always pick out those differences when they say, well, hang on a second, I know there's Joe's Bar and Grill is down the street, they have this many jobs, why aren't they showing up here? So that will happen here. But in terms of the home office campuses, again, I don't believe that there's a specific Implan industry sector that would show up in, and so because of the definitions of our businesses, that's just not something that would be highlighted here.
Because of technology and because of the ability to communicate entirely differently than we were 20, 30 years ago, a home office doesn't have to be where the business is. It can be totally separate, and we have such a wonderful place to live here, it would seem to me it would be attractive to setting up a home office campus, and we've got perfect land available for it.
I think it could make a ton of sense. Just in our office, one of our most senior economists, Randy Pazdina, who has been doing this now for close to 40 years, he never comes into the office anymore. He has a home in Manzanita, and he works out of his Manzanita home all the time, and he's very productive, very involved in all of our projects, but he can do that from his house at the coast. And so you're right that definitely is an opportunity to consider.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We need to get on to our next topic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chandler? This is economic development.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam President. I believe I can answer some of those questions that you posed in this section, as also it leads into the next ones. Mayor, you had asked about cities that have done these things. Let me use the two that I oversaw, and as a lead into a discussion on an economic development plan. The first is when I was serving as a city manager in Cedar City, and we looked at the resources, the advantages, and the disadvantages we had. We found that we had three distinct advantages. We had first rail service, the only rail service between Salt Lake City and Las Vegas, Nevada. We had cheap land, and we had easy access to the interstate. They gave us markets to the north in Salt Lake, markets to the south in the Southern California area, and Las Vegas. And so we began by talking about what is it that we were actually wanting to accomplish with economic development, which is the first component of an economic development plan. It's the mission statement. What do you want to do? What do you actually want to accomplish? In our case, the city had gone through a pretty severe recession. Its main industry had collapsed, which was iron mining, and it had gone through a severe reduction in the wages. So the chief goal that we had in Cedar City was to raise wages. And so our focus, when we looked at those three priorities, was to develop opportunities for manufacturing. And our development plan included the creation with a partnership between a private company and the state, an 800-acre manufacturing park that fit right along the railroads. The city prepared a package of incentives along with the state and with the private developer that affected the land costs that would attract people or attract businesses to come in. And then one of the most important things that we did is that in that economic development plan, we began to put together what the city's advantages were that we would publish and what the city's disadvantages were that we wouldn't publish. Those ones, we just began working on them, quietly working on them to strengthen them and to overcome those disadvantages. Ultimately, that manufacturing park went into play. Over a 6-year period, we brought in a very large pipe manufacturing company, helped a couple others expand, and it continues to grow. It was a wonderful partnership. When I was serving as a city manager in North Ogden, we went through the same process. We looked at our advantages, we looked at our disadvantages. We set forth our mission statement, what we wanted to accomplish. In that case, it was retail development. It was a building community. It was not going to become a business hub. It was not going to become a manufacturing hub, but it would be a hub for retail. Now, in Utah, that's significant because a third of your budget comes through sales tax. And so creating opportunities where retail would come in would significantly improve the budget as well as help the clamoring that we had for different types of retail services. So we put our efforts into working at expanding the retail opportunities. The most significant thing that we did in that case was that we assisted Smith's grocery store, which is owned by Kroger, to go from a grocery store to one of their supercenters, like a Walmart supercenter. And again, we developed some packages on how to provide some incentives, how to help them along with that, and ultimately we were able to do that, and it had a significant impact on it. But it began with an economic development plan, okay, and that's what I'm here to discuss just a little bit today. And that begins with, first, by defining a mission statement. What is it you actually want to accomplish in your community? That's generally a broad statement, not as specific in tactics, but a broad statement. And I put in your packet some examples of languages that would have been used in other areas. Provide rich business resources for the creation, growth, and recruitment of companies. Maintain a healthy business climate. Attract jobs that increase the average city wage rate. Those are broad statements, and ultimately those would come from you as the City Council / Urban Renewal Board. The next part of that is a discussion on the goals and objectives or what to do to accomplish that mission statement. For example, they include recruiting, conducting market surveys, research, improving employment opportunities, and so forth, and you can read those in your packet. The third thing is probably actually at this point in time our most important thing to do, and that is gathering essential information. Ultimately, when you look at how do you do this, there has got to be there's got to be a central person for the city that has information about what we have and about what businesses want. Okay? So the question was, How do I know if I want to get a cash and carry here? What are they going to require? What are their education requirements? What are their water requirements? What are their street requirements? What is their access requirements, access to an interstate? Do they need an airport? What are the different things that these industries need? Well, the only way and then the other part of it is, if you're going to go after them, you got to be able to demonstrate that you meet their needs. And that comes from information that's being provided by us. That includes things such as your demographic information, your community profiles, your population, your education level, your transit abilities, tax rates, attractions, industries that exist, employment, and infrastructure. And ultimately, somebody is going to have to represent the city in both selling it and in both gathering information as to what businesses need or what industries need. For example, it would not be we would not be very effective if we needed to find an industry that needed rail service here. There isn't rail service here, and the cost of providing it is so totally prohibitive that it's not worth our time. That's all the kind of information that individual would be able to provide and to assess so that they know how to go out and work with these different businesses. That information is probably the most important information that you need right now. To know your strengths and to know your weaknesses, to know industry strengths, to know industry's weaknesses, and more importantly, what they are looking for. Other key things in the development of an economic development plan, including developing key partnerships, especially with the state, with the county, and the private sector as well. Economic development in today's world means incentives. What is it that you're willing to provide a business to either expand or to locate here? And as I mentioned in Cedar City, that meant working with a private company in delaying costs of construction to help bring the construction costs down. And in North Ogden, for us, that meant working on infrastructure. When we approached Smiths on this, their original idea was just write us a check for $1 million and we'll expand. And we said, no, that's never going to happen. But we began looking at the infrastructure. What are some of the regional needs that they would need and that we could meet, such as detention basins, increased sizes of sewer lines, and we began to partner with them on putting in the facilities that not only would facilitate their expansion, but also be good for the city's infrastructure itself. That becomes an important part of it. Recruiting, looking at the industries that are there. The gap analysis provides a good beginning, but it is only a beginning. There is much more that would need to be done. And as I mentioned, finally the question becomes, who is going to do this? Now, in my career, I've done where we both have had an in-house person that has worked on this, and I've also done where we hired somebody to do this. And both were very, very successful. And in both cases, it depended on the person that you had doing it, and they were very successful. But that's really where we are at this point. We have had some very successful economic development plans. They have been through our VCD, through its tourist promotion. We don't tend to think of that as economic development, but it is. The Urban Renewal has had some very effective economic development activities in their loan programs and in their grant programs. What you're moving into is a very traditional economic development activity of trying to help businesses either to expand or to attract other businesses. Now, I say that this is a lead-in to our next two topics, where Richard Townsend is going to talk about the gathering of that information, and then also Kurt Olson is going to talk about some existing properties that may be ready to go at this time. So are there any questions that you have of me?
Mr. Anderson?
I would run kind of the same chicken and egg question. As I stated before, we know where we're handicapped and are working towards that, but not yet. So I guess I'm wondering out loud, why would we, other than to formalize an initiative, look to hire internal or external person to do something when we still need to work on housing and having housing available and medical, the baseline components.
The proposal that I would give to you today is not hiring an outside person. There's still much work that needs to be done before that. Our staff is fully capable of gathering the information, putting it together, and coming back to you with that information so you can begin to develop a economic development plan. The last question is who will do all of this is really the salesperson question. And that, to me, is not a question that you need to answer at this point. I think you have staff that's fully capable of getting you up to that point. And then the question you really have to ask yourself is, do we have capacity within our staff to do it in-house? This is the salesperson. It's the person that's going out, visiting the trades, that's showing off why you should come here, why you should expand here. But that's a little bit down the road. There's much that needs to be done before that.
Madam Chairman, are you saying then that it's councils or urban renewals agencies, probably challenge would be what kind of priority this is? Because we have plenty else to do, and we do it and have. So maybe the first step is to acknowledge that we want to do something in this category, and even though we may be doing a lot of the basics, somehow wrap it into a bigger initiative called economic development, so it gets a little more pizzazz and
it gets a little more focus.
Okay.
As I mentioned, we've been doing economic development. In our comprehensive plan work, we will be gathering some of this kind of information. But if you're really intent on looking at creating the opportunities to attract businesses or to expand businesses, then it ultimately has to be a more focused effort.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We're running way behind schedule. So.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
Good evening, councilors or agency members, whatever hat you're wearing tonight. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the comprehensive plan process we're starting. It's going to be a multi-part document that must address the requirements of state law, state regulations, including addressing the applicable statewide planning goals. There's 19 goals, but some of them don't apply to us here. But we also have to look at our plans have to be based on inventories of areas suitable for increased economic growth and activity, including an analysis of the community's economic patterns, potentialities, strengths, and deficiencies, contain policies concerning the economic development opportunities in the community, provide for at least an adequate supply of sites of suitable sizes, types, and locations and service levels, and limit uses on or near site zone for specific industrial and commercial uses. And this is in the staff report I gave you. We're going to have in the comprehensive plan, in addition to the entire plan, there'll be some sub areas that are going to get particular emphasis. Transportation is one, housing is another, economic development is the other. It's possible there may be more, but that's my thinking right now is focus on those three areas. The first steps in doing this are to gather information, get background information, and to start the public process. For gathering the background information, we've already started that. We're doing that in-house, gathering demographic information, economic information, things like population and population projections, not only population trends, but population projections. In the staff report, I give you a list of 18 different areas that we're looking at of data collection. And there may be more in addition to that, but we can be constrained a little bit by what data are available and whether it's in a useful form, for instance, concentrated down enough. We can get a lot of information about the nation, about the state, some about the county. Getting it at the Lincoln City level can be harder. There's a lot of good information available from the American Community Surveyors as part of the census, but it may not be completely comprehensive, but there is some really good information. There's also information available from other sources, such as the Oregon Tourism Commission, for example, has some wonderful information that we're using. The idea behind gathering this information is to find out where we are now. Right now, we really don't have that information. We don't know what's our starting point. And we will be, in addition to the work we're doing in-house on gathering this basic information, we also we got a grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development to undertake a buildable lands inventory and economic opportunities analysis. You heard mentioned before that we need to do that. The last one we did was in 2006, and so it's been 10 years, and we need to do another one. And it's also will address affordable housing. One of the key steps. So we've got the in-house work we're doing on gathering information. We've got the consultant who'll be working soon on developing the buildable lands inventory and economic impact or economic opportunities analysis. There's a third piece of it, actually, and that's citizen input on gathering what people are concerned about, what they want to see the city become. We're planning on starting fairly quickly a very substantial citizen involvement program to reach out to people and be as broad as we can and as inclusive as we can to identify really what is the vision, the community's vision for the city. Where do the people as a whole want the city to go? And from that we can tease out some appropriate goals and so on. So as far as the economic opportunities analysis and buildable lands and affordable housing, as I said, we got a grant for $50,000. We're going to get a statement of work. We're working with the Department of Land Conservation Development on developing a statement of work to put in a request for proposals. I expect to have their draft within a couple of days, and then we'll do some sort of back and forth on possible changes, and then go out for a request for proposals on that. Right now, the expectation is that process, as far as, again, the economic opportunities, buildable lands, and affordable housing, that'll probably take basically the rest of the year to get that done. The other material, the basic demographic information, basic economic information, expect to have that done within a few months. The other piece of getting the ball rolling, again, is on the citizen involvement. As I said, we're going to do a great deal of outreach. Going to the idea is to get out to where the people are rather than have them come to us. Go to events, go to where they are, go to churches, go to any place there's meetings and that kind of thing, and get input from people. We will be shortly putting out an RFP for a consultant to help with that. There's a substantial amount of effort that the consultant can do, and also to help staff and actually other people gather the necessary information that we want to get relative to the vision and so on. Once we get that information collected, we'll be able to, I think, pull out what the vision for the community is, and from that synthesize the goals that would be appropriate to reach that vision, to make that vision a reality. And then, so what we're doing is the idea is taking where we are now, gathering that information on where we are now, coming up with where we want to be, and then the plan is how do we get there. So we have policies to figure out how to get from where we are to where we want to be. So again, the economic development piece is one of the major pieces of it, and it's also very data intensive. So we'll have something on that fairly quickly, I think. So. And one advantage also of doing that data gathering ourselves right now is whenever you read a statement of work for a consultant, step one is gather background information. And we can just hand them the book and say, here it is. So we just saved $10,000, so several times, because it'd be over and over again. So that's where we are on the comprehensive plan right now. If you have questions.
Any questions?
No. Looking forward to it.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Anderson?
And Mr. Townsend, I'm sure you're aware of it, but last year Lincoln County did or at least published an economic study of some time. I guess I'd encourage you at least to touch base with them, because there may be some research that we can use, save you a little trouble. The other is just a point of contention. Since we pay county taxes, I'm always looking for a way to at least get some use out of those county taxes. And we have a economic alliance that's funded with some of our county taxes. And so encourage you not to be bashful in calling upon the alliance.
Yeah, I meet with them regularly, and actually one of the things we're going to do for the comprehensive plan is have a fairly big, I don't want to call it a committee, but a group to gather people together to get out and get people and make sure we're getting the right people. And the people in the Economic Development Alliance are a key piece of that.
Okay. Thank you.
We've been talking about them, as I say, for some time on that.
Mr. Norcott?
Mr. Townsend, you asked at the end of your, not the end of your memo, but in your memo, you raised issues, what background information regarding economic development might even be included in your list, and I would include natural resources, the bay, rivers, forests, etc., that I believe we can attract more visitors to, as well as the community college, which I think we can make better use of, and the proposed new hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the key things we're going to be building with, I guess what we can call our anchor institutions, such as the hospital, the school district, the casino, the college, and so on, and all pull together in the same direction and work together. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, I guess if I may, Madam Chair,
Mr.
it's
Williams?
just briefly, just piggyback on what Councilor Norika said. Is I would like to see a little more state and federal county government seats here, offices rather. Mm-hmm. We pay a lot to the county.
Yeah.
And we've talked to Commissioner Hall about that, but I would like to see a little bit more development along that line.
Yeah. I did meet last week with people from the Workforce Investment Board, and they're looking for about 3,000 square feet of space. We'll have several people here. So
we have that.
Pardon me?
We have that. It's right up there.
Yeah. But I know they're looking for new space and
great. I think that's perfect.
Referred them to a number of places.
Those are very good paying jobs.
So, yeah.
Okay. Good news.
Good.
Okay. Other comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Townsend. And Mr. Olson again. So we have about 45 minutes to do about 45 minutes of work.
Good job. You brought us back on track. So
as most all of you know for sure, that the Urban Renewal Agency has acquired a number of properties or portions of properties over the years, and most of them have been developed as we anticipated. Whenever the Urban Renewal Agency buys a piece of property, it needs to meet some goal within the Urban Renewal Plan. And most of them have been developed as we anticipated. However, there are 4 of them that we'd like to review this evening. Each of these was purchased with a purpose, like I said. However, that purpose perhaps has changed over the years for one reason or another. For example, the Urban Renewal Agency Development Plan identified the need for a park with some visitor parking and some street improvements in the middle of Ocean Lake. And it specifically shows in the plan to be on 15th Street. Now, those aren't necessarily means that it has to be, but that was the recommendation that sort of came up when that plan was developed. So the agency started acquiring property in the 15th Street area. We bought a number of pieces of property just for that purpose. And then when it got down to doing the projects, the Parks Department advocated very strongly, urged us to not build a park there. That the beach was so close, they didn't need another park. It would have to be a major park. It didn't need a pocket park. It needed to be a major park, and they weren't ready to maintain it. So we used the property that we had to build some parking, and we put a street through there, that jetty street that connects 15th and 16th. And we did some of the street improvements, obviously. So at this point now, we are left with one remnant lot in the middle of that street. The agency also assembled several properties for the realignment of 32nd Street in the Nelscott area. I think we acquired almost 7, 8 pieces of property, all different sizes and shapes, in order to get enough property for the new 32nd Street to go through in Nelscott. Now that project's done, you see basically what's left there. There's a really nice opportunity for redevelopment on the corner there of the new street. And so we believe it would be a good idea to do some sort of commercial development on that parcel, and no matter how big it ends up being. And just north of the Dee River, there was the agency partnered with the Devils Lake Water Improvement District because they needed access to the dam structure in the mouth of the Dee River. The Open Space Committee had a desire to acquire a piece of that property to maintain it as open space, and then the Urban Renewal Agency bought into it as well, thinking that there would be some development on at least on Highway 101 frontage, that there would be an opportunity to do some development there. And then finally, as you're all aware, at the end, in Taft, the properties that we've assembled in Taft, near the end of 51st Street. Those properties again began being acquired and assembled in order to do a project that the plan identified as being what we called the Oregon Coast Weather Tsunami Center, and that project just never seemed to be able to get wings. We put a lot of effort into it. It was the project of the year for the Governor's Economic Alliance at one point in time. But the feasibility study just showed that a community of our size wasn't going to be able to support that, and we weren't able to find a partner that would take that on. And so it looks like the latest feasibility studies show that a project, some sort of a mixed-use development project, would be the highest and best use for that facility or that property. But at the time that study was done, I think it was in 2007 or 2008, was when this isn't the good time to do it. But it will be, and we believe that will be is now. So we're in the process of putting together a draft document that you requested about how we're going to dispose of or develop these properties. And so we're here for maybe a little discussion about what your current objectives might be for the property development or for those properties. I mean, if it's just, let's get them on the tax rolls, let's just sell them and get them on the tax rolls, that makes it a lot easier than if it is, we want to create 15 jobs, or you've seen in your staff report, I gave you a long list of kinds of different ideas that you may want to consider as what you would like to see staff try to accomplish by disposing of those properties. So I'll open that up for some discussion unless the city manager has some additional thoughts.
Mr. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, Kurt, just to start off, I came up with some questions on just the property list, if I could, first and foremost. So if you have that in front of you, under the undeveloped list, those four, and Southwest 51st, and I know where that is. My question is, the old property that was the Solette's house that we cleared and no longer is there, is that also part of the Southwest 51st? So it's a much larger piece than the old Hershey's.
Yes, we assembled one more piece, and that was, there was actually two properties. There was a vacant property and the house, correct? And so they're all contiguous.
Real big then, okay. Same thing on Northeast 3rd Street, undeveloped, but then down in interim use, we also have Northeast 3rd, which is a parking lot. Can those two be combined? And if we were to go to a developer, those to get more square footage for land, perhaps more opportunity, and just the caveat is we need some public parking in whatever gets done?
Yes, before we get to that, unless it's on there as Southeast 3rd Street, I believe that interim use one probably should have been Southeast 3rd Street.
Okay.
Yeah, in the old kite shop, and I suspect.
So that should be instead of Northeast.
Yeah. And it just seemed like there was a need for some public access to the lake in that area, and because of its floodplain issues, that probably the most developable piece is going to be something along, at highway level, with maybe parking underneath, kind of thing.
Well, staying with that same site, I know the other hat we wear as a city council, the city was donated some land in that same area recently, a year or two ago. And I guess whatever we do, I would hope we could do it jointly, the agency and the city, if it makes any sense to connect those two properties as potential.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think the city also owned at least one or two other parcels in there prior to that. So there's quite a bit of land between the D Lake, the D River Hostetler Park, and let's say the cultural center.
Because I think that helps, at least broadens the opportunities of what a developer might see as a potential, if we can, rather than just the one strip from urban renewal along 101.
I guess one of the reasons I see that is because when I first came to Lincoln City, there was a strip of businesses at highway level with sort of an underground, behind it and under it was part businesses and part parking, but where Calkins had their boat works, but there were businesses. Calkins had gone out of business by then, so there was about 3 or 4 shops on the highway, and they were really popular because of all the traffic that the river attracts.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sprague?
In the past, we've been severely criticized for having a large inventory of property not being on the tax rolls. And I realized that at the time, for instance, 51st Street, we were looking at a particular project that we thought might work there, and so we acquired that. Turns out now that isn't feasible or didn't work, and so now it sits there. And I think we can probably say that scenario meets a number of pieces of property that we do have. And my thought is that it makes sense to put them down the tax rolls if we're not going to be needing them or using them.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Williams?
Where's the President? The President or Chair?
Chair.
Chair? Okay.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Well, I said President. I just want to make sure I got it right. It really sounded good when I said it. It did. That's why I thought, I'm going to join the party here. Thank you. I guess the pieces that I'm missing here are zoning, size, and highest and best use for each of these. That's what I need to make a decision. I don't I know the geographic area, but I couldn't tell you exactly what Northwest 17th refers to. And I'd sure like a little bit of that information. Are they ready to be built on? Could they, are they large enough to, or are we just talking about odd little shapes that Urban Renewal has acquired that nobody could do anything with anyway?
You're talking about the list, Northwest 17th Street on the list?
Yeah.
So that's the parking lot next to Hershey's. That was one of the first projects Urban Renewal
Right, I guess
did.
I don't need the, list from you now. I'm just, is there a way, somewhere where I can get that information that would tell me exactly what these are?
Mr. Mayor, we can provide that information.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And
I just
probably
got
that
a decision about it.
I'm stumbling a little bit just because we did that presentation, but I think it was just before this group took over, and so we went through all of those, perhaps, but we talked about, we bought property for parking lots, but there may be a higher and better use for that parking lot next to Hershey's. For example, if someone came in and bought up the trailer park and said, hey, we want to do some kind of development there, well, we would probably rather have the parking lot back off the highway and have the businesses up to the front, so it would make sense to make some sort of a trade with a developer.
Right, I guess that's just my questions.
So although they seem like they're important parking lots right now, they may be, like we have listed here, this is an interim. We're just land banking that for something even better.
Exactly, and that's just kind of the information I'm looking for.
Well, I think some of those parking lots in Ocean Lake were in exchange for the parking being taken off of 101.
Well, that is one of the things that Urban Renewal has been asked to do. And it goes to sort of the comment that Mr. Sprague had about taking property off the tax rolls. Yeah, we've taken 17th Street off the tax rolls, but I think there's a lot of businesses in that area that appreciate that, and that they don't have to pay taxes on that land, and that, and we don't want every single business in Ocean Lake to have a parking lot next to it. We want every single business in Ocean Lake to have a business next to it, and that's what creates the density that you need, and that's why people get out of their car and walk around Ocean Lake, and they don't do that up in Wacoma area.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Anderson?
Playing off the mayor's comments, how flexible are we? I'm remembering the Fernwood write-up for the villages where I got the impression that the seller of that property or the owner of that property, which is the city, would be very flexible in changing zones and open to discussion. Are we as open to discussion on these 4 lots, or these, the undeveloped ones? Do we have that flexibility? Within reason, and I don't know what a developer might need, but I'm wondering, just because it may be zoned residential or something that, and it's sitting right next to 101, we could assist in the efforts to get it changed to commercial or whatever's needed if we have a developer ready to go. So I'm looking for, I know Urban Renewal doesn't have the ability to change zones, but
we know the guy that does.
That's what I want to hear.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Especially at this point in time, we have flexibility, because that's sort of what we're, why this is being brought up, is what do you want to do with the property? And so is it something that we want to we want to control what happens and do something that is in the TAP plan, or that's in the Ocean Lake plan, or that's in the Business Gap plan, or that's in the Urban Renewal plan, or do we want to just send it out to the free market and see what happens?
Well, looking at them, I can tell you, none of them jump out at me as housing opportunities, and we've got that going. So my reaction is, I want to get them back on the tax roll. I'd like to see some, on the tax rolls and new wood or metal or something coming out of those, because I'm assuming that would generate jobs and businesses, opportunities. And I can't think, you haven't told me that any of these are locked in for some other wish list we had at one time, and just waiting for the right opportunity. So I guess I would throw the door wide open and you'll let someone with a pocketbook tell me what they see here and how accommodating can we be, would be my reaction. And soon would.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Ryan?
51st Street, and we had talked about a tsunami weather center, and it's a fairly large chunk of property. It could be developed like up to the hillside part. There could be a housing component. There's a number of things that could be done with it. And that is large enough area, in an area that has some attractive parking, that is one of those areas where we could theoretically, if we could find somebody that was interested in attract an indoor recreational or entertainment center, as we had talked about in the earlier hours, that's family oriented. It's a big enough chunk of property. At one time, the vision had been to build some motel units up the side of the hill, essentially, stack them up with, attraction of the tsunami center and/or restaurant shops with parking underneath. It was a fairly comprehensive kind of a look at the whole thing, and some of those ideas might be something that would be very attractive in that area. Certainly it would be something that would be might be able to be accommodated on that property.
Yeah, and I think that each one of these sort of has to be looked in that light, that we have this, the Taft properties have this unique feature to them that there are a lot of people there already, and so what can we do to take advantage of that? And there's, a business has probably a better chance of some sort of a commercial retail business of making good on that in that location because of that. And so by just making residential may not be the highest and best use for it.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Anderson.
Kurt, I'm remembering when we did this for 15th Street and that lot with, and one of the things I remember, I think you were sharing with me, and maybe it was the other planners as well, the idea of, a vision that what this bigger, not just the lot, but what the area could be like, and just throwing out, that corner on 15th, Northwest 15th and Harbor, residential today, or there is a house there, could be a small or medium-sized lodging facility up on the knoll. It's high, very picturesque and scenic. So when we have places like Southwest 51st, so the question is, we can share all our data with developers and, put in a paragraph or something that, we think water attractions or something might be, something to think about. But at the end of the day, I want somebody to buy it and build something. And if I can save them some trouble, i.e. sharing with them some studies we have, great. But I guess I'm not prepared to lock them in and say, we absolutely want a water slide here, would be my contention. But I'll share any data that we have.
Madam Chair.
Mr.
For the 51st property, I've been very envious of Newport and NOAA and all the things that were accomplished simply because a federal agency moved in. That dredging wouldn't have occurred. The dock would not have occurred without that. And I would just love to see something developed there that would mirror that somehow, whether we could bring a federal agency and a state research agency, a university, to develop something there that would need to make use of our access to the ocean from there so that we can then dredge the bay and we can develop our docks again and make that a viable port once again for traffic up and down the Silettes. That would be my vision for it. And whether it's possible in that small of an area or not, I don't know. But I sure would love to see that happen, because that would be, again, good-paying jobs, good support, good housing, and development of that bay for everyone's use.
Mr. Narkis?
Mr. Olson, if you have any questions for discussion, which parcels should be considered for sale at this time? My answer would be all of them. Is the agency willing to consider development incentives? My answer would be yes. Is the agency interested in sale or lease or both? My answer would be both. And what are the goals and objectives of the agency for a property development plan? We have a very inclusive list on the second page, and I believe returning to the tax rolls would entail a number of those possible goals and objectives as well. So that would be my feedback. And if you need more specifics regarding each property, I've got a list of these various issues that I thought would apply.
Great. Maybe the next time you're by the office, we could chat about those specifics.
Sure.
And Madam Chair, just a quick question. We are just talking about the undeveloped and interim use properties. We're not talking about the cultural center and the house studio.
Undeveloped was what I was really needing some discussion
All right, just
on.
want to make sure.
Okay, good.
So
All
if
right,
we need
you're down
move on.
to 20 minutes for the 30-minute presentation about city image.
I can do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you.
Just real quick before we go into the next part, so just as a summary and as a recap, I always like to know where we're going. At the end of a presentation like this, the purpose of today's meeting was to just update you, throw out some ideas, get a good discussion going. The next step would be for the staff to bring back to you some action plans, timelines, so forth for implementing, creating an economic development plan that's more long-term, and also for the sale of the property, which would also include some criteria on why we would be selling it, what a purchaser would need to meet. Bring both those back to you so that you can then give us your approval or modification as you feel appropriate. Let me jump right to what we hope to accomplish on this next point. Our intent, as we talk about the city's image, is to hire a graphic artist to prepare some conceptual ideas. Probably be somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 to do that. Present those ideas in a series of focus groups. Present the findings of our focus groups to you, and ultimately to prepare guidelines for using any city's logos or images that come out of those, and then also strategies for implementing the Brooks report and the image guidelines itself. We have discussed the Brooks report in the past, and so part of this is a little bit of a follow-up to that discussion. Now, let me tell you why we want to do that.
Mr. Chandler,
Yes.
will this be in conjunction with the BCB so that we're not duplicating ourselves?
Yes, it would be a citywide,
Okay.
all departments, all aspects of the city.
I mean,
Matter of fact,
urban renewal to do one thing and BCB to be doing another.
well, you'll see why I say yes to that answer. So the question that we have been discussing is how Lincoln City presents itself. And before that, I want to just talk a little bit of a couple of other communities that we saw. The Columbus, Ohio, Arlington, Virginia. There's some coordinated efforts that you see. We'll discuss these a little bit more. Arlington is able to, even though their colors change, you've got the same symbol that it's being used throughout. You can see the same thing with Berlin, Minneapolis, and San Antonio. And San Antonio is the one I want to discuss a little bit more. These are the logos for San Antonio. These are the city logos. And as you can see, it's the shape and the color which is paramount. And when you see that logo, what you see is that it's recognized as the San Antonio logo. And then you can see how they've done their different departments with a picture in it. And then, of course, on their signs, you would have the the Development Services Department and so forth. That logo and those colors carry out through all of their documents, all of their web pages, all of their different functions of their city, As you can see, they use it for their 311. Their 311 mobile app. It gets used in their tourism trade, and it gets carried throughout. And what's interesting about this one is it goes beyond just the city organization itself, and it begins to carry itself through the community. And so you will see in their conference center and other areas where you're seeing that same logo, the colors that are continue to go and play through that. A very coordinated effort so that it's very identifiable as their community. These are their wayfinding signs that they have put up. Again, colors may be a little bit different, but the shape of it is continue to carry forward. And you just see this throughout all of the San Antonio's way it presents itself. The other one is Columbus, and what I found interesting about Columbus is that the colors may change. It may be for different organizations, such as the mayor used it. It's used by the Sports Commission. It's used by the Chamber of Commerce. But the basic brand or image is consistent. And the thing that I found interesting about Columbus is how it carried through beyond just the city organization itself. Okay? So these are just some other examples of continuing of how Columbus has presented itself. So that brings us to Lincoln City. These are the approved, and I'm told there may be one or two more that I was not aware of at the time we put this together. These are the approved logos of the city. This one is used by the administration. This one is used by the VCB, the library. This one I don't see as much, but it is still in use, and then this is the community center. And then when you go through on how we present ourselves, I find interesting that our main web page does not use any of those. Not even the type is the font is the same. The library has theirs, the community center, of course, has his, the VCB uses theirs. And then when you go outside the city organization itself, you can see that we're just kind of all over the place. There's no central image to Lincoln City. When you go into these other parts of our districts, for example, Ocean Lake, beautiful sign, as you'll see on the next ones, but nothing to indicate that you're in Lincoln City itself. This becomes very significant when you look at our banners. Again, they do a very good job of promoting our districts, but not necessarily say that you're in Lincoln City. So, as I mentioned, what we would like to do is to begin by hiring a graphic artist to prepare about 7, 8, 9 different examples, begin taking those out into focus groups, and bring those back to you, and then ultimately begin to prepare an image as part of our community. This was, interesting enough, in the Brooks report, was identified as the #1 thing that we needed to do, was this very thing. And then not only would we prepare guidelines on how to use those images, but we would also prepare an implementation plans for the Brooks study. If you go back through that, you'll see that there are several things that we have already done. We've been pretty successful at it, but there's many more things. They had about 53, 54 different recommendations. And the farther you get into the report, the more you find the things that are the next step that we need to do. So this is simply at this point to provide you some information, get your input on how we would like to proceed. So if you have any questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Sprague.
Oh.
Mr. Sprague.
I thought you, excuse me, wait. We're still in urban renewal. Pardon me. I would hope that we do away with that little saying that was at the bottom of those signs when you entered Lincoln City, that it's a great place, a place to try new things. That doesn't speak at all to Lincoln City or the beach, and I just can't understand how we ever got there.
If you recall from your presentation from Mr. Dreistedt, that was one of the recommendations.
I knew that. I just want to re-emphasize that. I like the idea of it, than stealing the thing from the casino. It's better at the beach. Or We now say 7 miles of smiles. At least those speak to more about what we do around here.
I really like the Lincoln City Central Oregon Coast. That it does a little bit towards identifying that we are on the beach where we are.
And Madam Chair?
Yes.
I guess the one thing I want to try to promote as much as possible is a local representation of this graphic artist. But I don't know exactly what you have to do in that process, if it has to be just to anyone. But I know we have a lot of talented artists in this town.
Any other comments? Mr. Anderson?
If I can, Madam Chairman. Ron, I heard the graphic artist and rendered, but I also thought I heard, focus groups and that kind of stuff. So I'm looking for confirmation that somehow the community, as wide as we can get it and as broad as we can get it, can give input into this process.
Yeah, you did hear that. It'll be very similar to the process that Ed went through. We would be looking to have focus groups that would consist of businesses, residents, tourists, all of those that have a part in our community.
Great.
Mr. Narkis?
I appreciate the work you put into this, Mr. City Manager, and I don't think the microphone's working any longer. But I would support your 5 proposals.
Thank you.
Mr. Sprague?
Yeah. I was wondering if businesses can use our local, for instance, the one on the right-hand corner up there, if we adopt that as our official logo, can other businesses use that in their advertising?
Yes, to a degree. And part of what would come out of this are the guidelines on using the logo or any images that come out of it. For example, they would be copyrighted. We do not want people adjusting them. We don't want them changing colors, or we don't want them changing the directions or changing it up. So the intent is that, yes, the more advertisement we as a city get, the better it is. But it would need to be within the guidelines that we have established.
Good.
Adjusting the sound quality because there was distortion.
Okay. Any other comments? Thank you all for a great presentation.
10 minutes to spare.
Lots of good information in the last 2 hours. We are adjourned.
There you go. What was that? What was that? Oh, I don't know. Yeah.